The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Princess Charlotte walked quietly through the corridors, her small hand trailing along the ornate wallpaper. At 8 years old, she had learned to move through the palace with the grace expected of royalty, but today something felt different. The usual warmth that filled these halls seemed absent, replaced by a tension she couldn't quite understand. Charlotte had always been close to her step-grandmother, Queen Camilla. In the years following her grandmother Diana's death and her stepmother's integration into the royal family, Camilla had made genuine efforts to connect with all the royal children. Charlotte remembered countless afternoons spent in Camilla's private sitting room, listening to stories and sharing tea with tiny sandwiches cut into perfect triangles. But, lately, things had changed. Charlotte noticed the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, how the adults would exchange glances that seemed heavy with meaning. Her father, Prince William, had been more protective than usual, and her mother, Catherine, wore a constant expression of worry that she tried to hide behind her practiced smile. The change had started 3 weeks ago, during what should have been a routine family gathering. Charlotte had overheard fragments of heated conversations between her parents and other family members. Words like precedence, protocol, and inappropriate behavior floated through closed doors. She didn't understand what they meant, but she could feel the weight they carried. Commander James Mitchell had been Charlotte's personal protection officer for 2 years. A former Royal Marines officer with 23 years of military service, he had transitioned into royal protection after being wounded in Afghanistan. His stern exterior masked a gentle heart, especially when it came to the young princess he had sworn to protect. Charlotte trusted him completely, often seeking comfort in his steady presence when the complexities of royal life became overwhelming. Mitchell had noticed the growing tension within the royal household. His trained eye caught the subtle shifts in body language, the careful positioning of family members during public events, and the increasing frequency of private meetings that excluded certain individuals. As a protection officer, he was privy to information that painted a clearer picture of the family dynamics at play. The conflict centered around protocol and tradition, but beneath the surface lay deeper issues of acceptance and belonging. Camilla, despite her years as queen consort, still felt the weight of public opinion and the shadow of Diana's memory. Some within the royal circle believed she had been overstepping her bounds, particularly in her interactions with William's children. There were whispers that she was trying too hard to establish maternal connections that weren't naturally hers to claim. On this particular morning, Charlotte had sought out Camilla's company, hoping to recapture some of the warmth they had once shared. She found the queen consort in the blue drawing room, reviewing documents with her private secretary. When Charlotte knocked softly on the doorframe, Camilla looked up with an expression that seemed forced rather than genuinely pleased. "Your Majesty," Charlotte said formally, using the title she had been taught, though it felt strange on her tongue. "May I come in?" Camilla's secretary quickly gathered her papers, sensing the need for privacy. As she left, Camilla gestured for Charlotte to sit on the silk-covered sofa across from her chair. The distance between them felt much greater than the few feet of Persian carpet that separated their seats. "What brings you here this morning, Charlotte?" Camilla asked, her voice carrying a coolness that the young princess had never heard before. Charlotte fidgeted with the hem of her dress, suddenly unsure of herself. "I was hoping we could have tea together, like we used to. I brought my drawing book to show you the picture I made of the garden." Camilla glanced at the small sketchbook in Charlotte's hands, then toward the clock on the mantelpiece. "I'm afraid I have rather important matters to attend to today, dear. Perhaps another time would be more suitable." The rejection stung, but Charlotte persisted. "Is everything all right, Granny Camilla? You seem different lately, and Mama and Papa have been talking in worried voices when they think I can't hear." The use of the informal title caused Camilla to stiffen visibly. She had once encouraged the children to call her Granny Camilla as a way of building a relationship separate from their memory of Diana. Now, however, it felt like an unwelcome reminder of boundaries that perhaps should have been maintained from the beginning. "Charlotte," Camilla said, her tone becoming more formal, "I think it's important that we observe proper protocol in our interactions. You should address me as Your Majesty in all circumstances, and I believe it would be appropriate for you to seek permission from your parents before requesting my time." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She had never needed permission to visit Camilla before, and the sudden formality felt like a wall rising between them. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back, remembering her mother's lessons about composure in public. "But I don't understand," Charlotte whispered. "Did I do something wrong? Why don't you want to spend time with me anymore?" Camilla's expression softened slightly at the sight of the child's genuine confusion and hurt. For a moment, her resolve wavered, and she remembered all the pleasant afternoons they had shared, the way Charlotte's face would light up when she told stories about the royal family's history, the pride she had felt when the little girl had sought her comfort during difficult moments. But the pressure from other family members and palace officials weighed heavily on her mind. There had been suggestions that her relationship with William's children was being perceived as an attempt to replace Diana's memory, something that could damage both her reputation and the monarchy's stability. The criticism had grown louder in recent weeks, particularly after Charlotte had publicly referred to her as Granny during a charity event, sparking a flurry of media speculation about family dynamics. "You haven't done anything wrong, Charlotte," Camilla said carefully. "But sometimes circumstances require us to adjust our relationships to better serve the crown and maintain appropriate boundaries." Charlotte stared at her with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The concepts Camilla spoke of were far too complex for an 8-year-old to grasp, but the emotional distance was painfully clear. The warmth and affection that had once characterized their relationship seemed to have vanished overnight, replaced by cold formality that made Charlotte feel like a stranger in her own family. "I miss how things used to be," Charlotte said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I miss talking with you about books and sharing our secret jokes. I miss feeling like part of the family." The innocence and sincerity in those words cut through Camilla's carefully constructed defenses. She could see the confusion and hurt in Charlotte's eyes, the way the child was struggling to understand why someone who had shown her love and attention was now pushing her away. For a moment, Camilla questioned whether the palace politics and family pressures were worth the pain she was causing this innocent child. But before she could respond with the warmth her heart wanted to show, the door to the drawing room opened and several palace officials entered, their expressions serious and purposeful. The moment of potential reconciliation was lost as duty and protocol reasserted their dominance over personal feelings. Commander Mitchell had been positioned outside the drawing room, maintaining his vigilant watch over Charlotte's safety. Through his earpiece, he could hear the conversation taking place inside, and each cold word from Camilla made his jaw tighten with suppressed anger. As a protection officer, he was trained to remain neutral and professional in all circumstances, but watching Charlotte's emotional pain was testing his resolve. He had seen this pattern before in other royal households, the way political pressures and public opinion could twist family relationships into cold, formal arrangements that served the institution at the expense of human connection. He had hoped that Charlotte might be spared such treatment, at least until she was old enough to understand the complexities involved. The officials who had entered the room began discussing arrangements for an upcoming charity event, their voices creating a business-like atmosphere that further emphasized Charlotte's exclusion from Camilla's priorities. Charlotte sat quietly on the sofa, clutching her drawing book and trying to make herself as small as possible. After several minutes of listening to conversations about schedules and protocols that had nothing to do with her, Charlotte stood up slowly. "I should probably go," she said softly. "I don't want to interrupt your important work." Camilla looked up from her discussion with the officials, caught between her desire to comfort the child and her determination to maintain the boundaries that had been imposed upon their relationship. "Yes," she said finally, "that would be best." Charlotte walked toward the door with as much dignity as she could manage, but Mitchell could see the tears threatening to spill over. As she reached the doorway, she turned back one last time, hope flickering in her eyes that Camilla might call her back, might bridge the gap that had opened between them. But Camilla had already returned her attention to the documents spread across her desk, and Charlotte was left standing in the doorway, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her young life. The officials continued their discussion as if she had never been there at all, their voices a stark reminder that in the world of royal protocol, an 8-year-old girl's feelings were often considered less important than institutional appearances. As Charlotte finally turned away and began walking down the corridor, Mitchell fell into step beside her, his trained eyes noting the way her small shoulders shook with suppressed emotion. He wanted to offer words of comfort, but protocol demanded that he maintain professional distance. Instead, he simply adjusted his pace to match hers and ensured that no one else would witness her moment of vulnerability. The seeds of a larger conflict had been planted in that drawing room, and Mitchell sensed that this was only the beginning of a situation that would test everyone's loyalties and principles before it was resolved. The days following Charlotte's painful encounter with Camilla brought an uncomfortable tension to the palace that seemed to seep into every corner of daily life. Commander Mitchell observed the young princess with growing concern as she withdrew into herself, speaking less during their walks through the palace grounds and showing little interest in the activities that usually brought her joy. Charlotte's parents, Prince William and Catherine, were acutely aware of the change in their daughter's behavior. During family dinners, she would sit quietly, picking at her food while her brothers, Prince George and Prince Louis, chattered about their day. When Catherine asked about her drawing lessons or her favorite books, Charlotte would respond with polite, short answers that lacked her usual enthusiasm. "She's been asking me about protocol," Catherine confided to William one evening as they walked through their private garden. "Yesterday she wanted to know if she needed permission to speak to palace staff, and this morning she asked me to review the proper way to address family members. It's as if she's afraid of making another mistake." William's jaw tightened as he listened to his wife's concerns. As second in line to the throne, he understood the importance of protocol and tradition, but he also remembered his own childhood and the way rigid formality could make a child feel isolated and unloved. He had hoped to provide his children with more warmth and normalcy than he had experienced growing up, but the recent developments threatened to undermine those efforts. "I've spoken with Father about the situation," William said, referring to King Charles. "He's aware of what happened, but he feels that Camilla is in a difficult position. The press has been particularly critical lately, suggesting that she's overstepping her role with the children." Catherine stopped walking and turned to face her husband. "Since when do we let tabloid speculation dictate how we treat our children? Charlotte didn't choose to be born into this family, but she deserves to feel loved and accepted by everyone in it." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. Commander Mitchell approached them with his usual professional bearing, but William could see the concern in the man's eyes. "Your Royal Highnesses," Mitchell said with a slight bow. "I wanted to speak with you about Princess Charlotte's security arrangements for tomorrow's charity event." "Of course," William replied, though he sensed there was more to the conversation than simple logistics. Mitchell glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard before continuing. "The princess has expressed some anxiety about attending public events where Queen Camilla will be present. She's asked me several times about proper behavior and seems concerned about making mistakes. I believe her confidence has been significantly affected by recent changes in family dynamics." Catherine's expression grew more troubled as she listened to Mitchell's observations. As a former commoner who had married into the royal family, she understood the challenges of navigating complex relationships and unspoken expectations. She had worked hard to help her children feel secure in their royal roles while maintaining as much normalcy as possible. "What do you recommend?" William asked, recognizing that Mitchell's years of experience with royal protection gave him unique insights into family dynamics. "With respect, sir, I believe the princess would benefit from some clarity about her place in the family and assurance that she hasn't done anything wrong. Children her age internalize rejection very deeply, and, without proper explanation, she may begin to question her worth and belonging." William nodded thoughtfully. Mitchell's words echoed his own concerns, but addressing the situation would require delicate handling to avoid creating additional conflict within the family. The charity event the following day was held at a children's hospital in London, one of Diana's former patronages that had been passed down to Catherine. The cause was close to the family's heart, and typically such events brought out the best in everyone involved. However, as the royal convoy arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere felt strained. Charlotte sat between her parents in the car, dressed in a pale blue dress that Catherine had chosen to complement her daughter's natural beauty. But, despite her picture-perfect appearance, Charlotte's nervousness was evident to those who knew her well. She kept glancing toward the other cars in the convoy, knowing that Camilla would be arriving shortly behind them. "Remember what we talked about this morning," Catherine said gently, squeezing Charlotte's hand. "You're going to meet some wonderful children today, and they're going to be so excited to see you. Just be yourself, and everything will be fine." Charlotte nodded, but her smile seemed forced rather than genuine. Mitchell, who was positioned in the front passenger seat, caught her eye in the rearview mirror and gave her an encouraging nod that helped steady her nerves slightly. As they entered the hospital, Charlotte performed her duties with the professionalism that had been trained into her from an early age. She spoke with young patients, admired their artwork, and listened to their stories with genuine interest. For brief moments, her natural warmth and compassion shone through, reminding everyone why the public had fallen in love with her. But, when Camilla arrived 20 minutes later, Charlotte's demeanor immediately became more guarded. She watched from across the room as her step-grandmother greeted hospital staff and began her own tour of the facilities. Several times, their paths nearly crossed, but Charlotte would find reasons to move to different areas, avoiding direct interaction. Mitchell noticed Charlotte's behavior and felt a growing frustration with the situation. He had served in combat zones where the rules of engagement were clear and the objectives were straightforward. The emotional warfare of family politics was far more complex and, in many ways, more damaging than anything he had experienced on the battlefield. The turning point came when a 7-year-old patient named Emma, who was recovering from heart surgery, asked Charlotte if she could meet the other pretty lady she had seen on television. Emma had been following the royal family's visits to various hospitals and was excited to meet both Charlotte and Camilla. Charlotte found herself in an impossible position. She wanted to fulfill the little girl's request, but her recent interactions with Camilla had left her uncertain about how to proceed. She glanced toward Mitchell, seeking guidance, and saw the understanding in his eyes. "Would you like me to ask if Queen Camilla has time to meet you?" Charlotte asked Emma, her voice carefully controlled. Emma's face lit up with excitement, and Charlotte knew she couldn't disappoint her. With Mitchell following at a respectful distance, she made her way across the hospital ward to where Camilla was speaking with a group of doctors. "Excuse me, Your Majesty," Charlotte said formally, her words carrying none of the warmth that had once characterized their relationship. "There's a young patient who has requested to meet you. If you have time in your schedule." Camilla turned at the sound of Charlotte's voice, and, for a moment, her carefully constructed composure wavered. She could see the formal distance that Charlotte was maintaining, the way the child held herself with rigid propriety rather than natural affection. The sight stirred feelings of regret and loss that Camilla had been trying to suppress. "Of course," Camilla replied, matching Charlotte's formal tone. "Please lead the way." As they walked together toward Emma's room, the space between them felt vast despite the physical proximity. Palace photographers captured images of them side by side, and, to the outside world, they would appear to be a loving grandmother and granddaughter fulfilling their royal duties. But Mitchell could see the tension in both their postures, the careful way they avoided any casual contact or unguarded moments. Emma's delight at meeting both royal ladies provided a temporary bridge over the awkwardness. The little girl's innocent questions and observations reminded both Charlotte and Camilla of their shared commitment to helping others, particularly children facing difficult circumstances. For a brief time, they worked together naturally, reading to Emma and listening to her stories about her family and dreams for the future. But, as the hospital visit concluded and they prepared to leave, the artificial nature of their interaction became apparent once again. Charlotte waited for Camilla to exit first, maintaining proper protocol, and, when Camilla paused as if wanting to say something personal, Charlotte's expectant but guarded expression seemed to discourage any attempt at genuine communication. Mitchell watched this painful dance of avoidance and suppressed emotion with growing anger. As a protection officer, his primary duty was to Charlotte's physical safety, but he increasingly felt that her emotional well-being was under assault in ways that no amount of security training could address. That evening, as Mitchell filed his daily security report, he found himself struggling with the professional neutrality that his position required. He had witnessed Charlotte's gradual withdrawal from family interactions, her increasing anxiety about making mistakes, and her obvious confusion about why someone who had once shown her affection was now treating her with cold formality. The situation came to a head 3 days later during what should have been a routine family gathering at Windsor Castle. The extended royal family had assembled for the christening of a distant cousin's baby, an event that typically brought together multiple generations in a celebration of family continuity and tradition. Charlotte arrived with her parents and brothers, dressed in a sunny yellow dress that Catherine hoped would lift her daughter's spirits. But, as they entered the castle's reception hall, Charlotte's steps slowed when she saw Camilla speaking with other family members near the grand fireplace. "Can we sit somewhere else?" Charlotte whispered to her mother, gesturing toward chairs on the opposite side of the room. Catherine's heart ached at her daughter's request, but, before she could respond, King Charles approached their group. As Charlotte's grandfather and the head of the family, he had been observing the growing tension with increasing concern. "Charlotte, my dear," Charles said warmly, crouching down to her eye level. "You look absolutely lovely today. I was hoping you might help me greet some of our relatives who haven't seen you in quite some time." Charlotte nodded politely, though her enthusiasm was clearly forced. As Charles led her around the room, making introductions and encouraging conversations, Mitchell positioned himself nearby, alert to any signs of distress from the young princess. The atmosphere remained tense but manageable until a thoughtless comment from a distant relative changed everything. Lady Pemberton, an elderly cousin known for her lack of social awareness, approached Charlotte with what she probably thought was a friendly observation. "My dear child," Lady Pemberton said loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause, "you must be so relieved that things are finally returning to proper order within the family. I've heard that some people have been getting rather above their station lately, but I'm sure your parents will ensure you understand your true place in the family hierarchy." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Charlotte's face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. She didn't fully understand the implications of Lady Pemberton's comment, but she could sense the judgment and criticism directed toward Camilla, and, by extension, toward their former relationship. Several family members quickly moved to redirect the conversation, but the damage had been done. Charlotte stood frozen in place, feeling exposed and ashamed without understanding exactly why. The suggestion that her previous closeness with Camilla had been inappropriate made her question every memory of affection and acceptance she had experienced. Camilla, who had overheard the comment from across the room, felt a surge of protective anger on Charlotte's behalf, followed immediately by crushing guilt about her own role in creating this situation. She took a step toward Charlotte, instinctively wanting to shield her from further criticism, but then stopped herself, remembering the boundaries that had been imposed on their relationship. Mitchell watched Charlotte's face crumple with confusion and hurt, and something inside him snapped. He had maintained professional neutrality through countless difficult situations, but watching an 8-year-old child being emotionally tortured by adult politics and social climbing was more than he could bear in silence. The christening reception continued around them, but Commander Mitchell could see that Charlotte was struggling to maintain her composure after Lady Pemberton's cutting remarks. The 8-year-old princess stood rigidly beside her grandfather, her small hands clenched at her sides as she tried to process words that seemed designed to make her feel ashamed of relationships that had once brought her joy. King Charles, recognizing the damage that had been done, quickly guided Charlotte away from Lady Pemberton toward a quieter corner of the reception hall. But Mitchell could see that the harm had already taken root. Charlotte's face had taken on the blank expression she wore when she was trying not to cry in public, a look that had become far too familiar in recent weeks. "Grandfather," Charlotte said quietly, tugging on Charles's sleeve. "May I please be excused? I don't feel very well." Charles knelt down beside her, his expression filled with concern and regret. "Of course, my dear. Would you like me to find your parents?" Before Charlotte could answer, Camilla appeared beside them, having crossed the room with determined strides. Despite the formal distance that had been imposed on their relationship, seeing Charlotte in distress had overridden every political consideration and family pressure. "Charlotte," Camilla said softly, crouching down to the child's level. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" The use of the endearment, the first warm word Camilla had spoken to her in weeks, caused Charlotte's careful composure to crack. Tears began to flow down her cheeks as she looked between her grandfather and the woman who had once been a source of comfort and security. "I don't understand what I did wrong," Charlotte whispered. "Lady Pemberton made it sound like I was bad for loving you, but no one will explain what happened or why everything changed. I just want things to go back to the way they were." Camilla felt her heart breaking as she listened to Charlotte's confused and heartfelt words. The political pressures that had seemed so important just moments before faded into insignificance when faced with the genuine pain of an innocent child who had done nothing except seek love and acceptance from her family. "Oh, darling," Camilla said, reaching out instinctively to touch Charlotte's face.
You didn't do anything wrong. Not a single thing. This is all about grown-up problems that have nothing to do with you."
But, before the moment of reconciliation could develop further, several palace officials approached their small group.
The lead official, a stern man named Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, cleared his throat meaningfully.
"Your Majesty," Sir Geoffrey said, addressing Charles, "perhaps this conversation would be better conducted in private, away from the other guests." The implication was clear. Even Charlotte's emotional breakdown was being viewed through the lens of public relations and protocol management. Charles's expression hardened as he recognized the cold calculation behind the suggestion. "Sir Geoffrey," Charles said with icy politeness, "I believe my granddaughter's well-being takes precedence over managing appearances at a family gathering." But Charlotte had already absorbed the message that her feelings were an inconvenience to be managed rather than addressed. She stepped back from Camilla, her face once again becoming carefully neutral. "I'm fine," Charlotte said in the practiced voice she had learned to use when performing royal duties.
"I apologize for causing any disruption. I should return to my parents now."
Mitchell watched this exchange with growing fury. He had sworn an oath to protect Charlotte from all threats, but the most damaging attacks on her well-being were coming from within her own family and the institution meant to support her. The sight of an 8-year-old child apologizing for having natural emotional reactions to being rejected and criticized was almost more than he could bear. As Charlotte began to walk away, her small figure moving with forced dignity across the reception hall, Mitchell noticed other family members watching the scene with various expressions of discomfort, sympathy, and calculation. Some seemed genuinely troubled by what they were witnessing, while others appeared to view the drama as confirmation that boundaries needed to be maintained. Prince William and Catherine had been speaking with relatives near the windows when they noticed the commotion. By the time they reached Charlotte, she had already composed herself externally, though Mitchell could see the emotional exhaustion in her posture and expression.
"Darling, are you all right?"
Catherine asked, immediately sensing that something significant had happened. "I'm perfectly fine, Mama," Charlotte replied with the same artificial composure she had shown moments before. "I was just speaking with Grandfather and Queen Camilla about the christening ceremony. It was very beautiful." The formal way Charlotte referred to Camilla, combined with her obviously forced cheerfulness, told William and Catherine everything they needed to know about the current state of their daughter's emotional well-being. They exchanged concerned glances over Charlotte's head, both recognizing that the situation had moved beyond family politics into genuinely harmful territory. As the reception continued, Mitchell maintained his professional vigilance while observing the complex dynamics playing out around Charlotte. He noticed how she carefully avoided any situations that might lead to casual interaction with Camilla, how she responded to questions with practiced responses that revealed nothing of her true feelings, and how she seemed to be constantly monitoring her own behavior for potential mistakes. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, with Charlotte gazing out the window at the London streets while her brothers napped in their car seats. William and Catherine spoke in low voices about logistical matters, but Mitchell could sense their underlying worry about their daughter's emotional state. "Commander Mitchell," Charlotte said suddenly, turning away from the window.
"Is it normal for families to have rules about who can love whom?"
The question cut straight to the heart of the matter with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Mitchell found himself struggling to provide an answer that would be truthful without adding to Charlotte's confusion.
"Families can be complicated, Your Royal Highness," Mitchell said carefully.
"Sometimes adults make decisions that are hard for children to understand, especially when those decisions seem to change things that were working well before." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully, though her expression remained troubled.
"Do you think I'll understand when I'm older, or will it always feel this confusing and sad?"
The question was directed at Mitchell, but William turned around from the front seat to answer.
"Charlotte, I want you to know that you are loved by everyone in this family, even when it might not feel that way.
Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes or let outside pressures influence their decisions, but that doesn't change how much you mean to all of us."
"Then, why does Queen Camilla act like she doesn't want to spend time with me anymore?"
Charlotte asked with devastating directness.
"Did I do something that made her stop caring about me?"
Catherine reached over to take Charlotte's hand, struggling to find words that would provide comfort without making promises about other people's behavior. "Darling, relationships between adults can be affected by many things that have nothing to do with the children involved. I don't believe Queen Camilla has stopped caring about you, but she may be dealing with pressures and expectations that are making it hard for her to show that care right now. Charlotte absorbed this explanation with the serious consideration she gave to all matters concerning family relationships. Mitchell could see her trying to understand concepts that were far too sophisticated for her age, attempting to make sense of a situation where love was being constrained by politics and protocol.
Will things ever go back to normal? Charlotte asked quietly.
I hope so, sweetheart, Catherine replied, though her voice carried uncertainty about how such a resolution might be achieved. That evening, as Mitchell completed his end-of-day security procedures, he reflected on the impossible position that Charlotte was being placed in. The young princess was being forced to navigate adult conflicts that she had no role in creating, while being held responsible for maintaining relationships that others had already damaged through their political maneuvering. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his office door. Prince William entered, looking tired and frustrated. Commander, I wanted to thank you for your attentiveness to Charlotte's emotional state today. Your observations about her anxiety and withdrawal have been very helpful as Catherine and I try to understand how to support her. Sir, if I may speak frankly, Mitchell said, I believe Princess Charlotte is experiencing a form of emotional trauma that could have lasting effects on her ability to trust and form relationships. The adults in her life are teaching her that love can be withdrawn without explanation and that her natural desire for affection is somehow inappropriate or problematic.
William sat down heavily in the chair across from Mitchell's desk. I know.
Catherine and I have been discussing the situation extensively, but addressing it requires delicate handling of family relationships and institutional pressures that go beyond what we can control as parents. With respect, sir, Mitchell said, his military training helping him maintain appropriate tone while delivering difficult truths, an 8-year-old child's emotional well-being should not be sacrificed to manage adult political considerations. Princess Charlotte is learning lessons about love, loyalty, and family that may shape her relationships for the rest of her life.
William nodded grimly.
You're right, of course. The question is how to address the situation without creating additional conflicts that could ultimately harm Charlotte even more.
Before Mitchell could respond, their conversation was interrupted by urgent knocking on the door. Catherine entered quickly, her face pale with worry.
William, we need to speak with Charlotte immediately. I just received a call from her school. She had an incident today during drama class where they were asked to role-play family situations. According to her teacher, Charlotte became extremely distressed and had to be removed from the classroom. The news hit both men like a physical blow. Mitchell immediately understood the implications. Charlotte's emotional struggles were now affecting her ability to function in normal childhood activities, a clear sign that the family situation had moved beyond manageable stress into potentially damaging territory.
What exactly happened?
William asked, his voice tight with concern. The children were asked to act out a scene where a grandparent visits for tea, Catherine explained. Charlotte apparently became very upset and started crying, saying she didn't know how to pretend to be happy when grandparents visit because she was afraid of doing something wrong. Her teacher said she seemed genuinely terrified of making a mistake that would make the grandparents stop loving her.
Mitchell felt his professional composure finally beginning to crack.
The image of Charlotte, alone in a classroom full of other children, breaking down because she could no longer imagine unconditional love from family members, was more than he could process with detached professionalism. This has to stop, Mitchell said, his voice carrying an edge of anger that surprised both William and Catherine. That little girl is being destroyed by adult politics, and everyone is standing by and letting it happen because protocol and appearances are being treated as more important than her emotional health. William and Catherine stared at Mitchell, recognizing the truth in his words but also understanding the complexity of the forces at work. The situation had reached a crisis point where action would be required, regardless of the political consequences. The emergency meeting that followed Charlotte's school incident brought together key members of the royal household in King Charles's private study at Clarence House. The atmosphere was tense as family members and palace officials gathered to address what had become an untenable situation. Commander Mitchell had been requested to attend, given his unique position as both Charlotte's protection officer and witness to her declining emotional state. King Charles sat behind his desk, looking older than his years as he contemplated the reports about his granddaughter's breakdown. Queen Camilla occupied a chair to his right, her face etched with guilt and regret. Prince William and Catherine sat together across from them, while several senior palace officials lined the walls like sentries guarding against any deviation from institutional protocol. Before we begin, Charles said heavily, I want to make it clear that this discussion is about Charlotte's well-being, not about managing public relations or maintaining artificial appearances. We have allowed political considerations to harm an innocent child, and that stops now. Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, the senior palace official who had intervened during the christening reception, shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, while we all share concerns about Princess Charlotte's emotional state, we must also consider the broader implications of any changes to established protocols. The monarchy's stability depends on consistency and appropriate boundaries. The monarchy's stability, William said with barely controlled anger, should not require the psychological sacrifice of its youngest members. My daughter is 8 years old, and she's developing anxiety about receiving love from her own family. That's not protocol, that's institutional cruelty. Camilla spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice heavy with emotion. This is my fault. I allowed myself to be influenced by criticism and pressure instead of trusting my instincts about what Charlotte needed. I've been so focused on avoiding accusations of overstepping my role that I forgot my responsibility to a child who had done nothing except trust me with her affection. Catherine leaned forward in her chair. Camilla, you're not the only one responsible here. All of us, the family, the palace officials, even the media, have created an environment where a little girl feels unsafe expressing natural love for her.